What if I told you that the Americas were shaped by a single mistake, a wrong turn that changed the world forever? From lost civilizations to hidden conspiracies, untold legends to shocking betrayals, this is the real history they didn't teach you in school. Stay with me, because once you know the truth, you'll never see the Americas the same way again. Hello, and welcome back to our channel. Imagine setting sail for a wealthy empire only to land on an entirely different continent by mistake. One wrong turn, and the fate of millions was rewritten. From the rise and fall of the mighty Aztecs and Incas to secret revolts, lost cities, and the truth behind Columbus's journey, history in the Americas isn't just about dates and battles. It's about power, deception, and survival. But here's the thing, much of what you've been told is only half the story. Stay with me, because once you hear the real history, you'll never see the Americas the same way again. They say history is written by the victors. But what if the real story of the Americas is far darker than we were ever taught? 1492. A navigator sets sail, believing he's heading to Asia. Instead, he stumbles upon a landmass that had already been home to millions for thousands of years. What happened next would ignite centuries of conquest, rebellion, and secrets buried beneath the sands of time. But here's what they didn't tell you in school. The Americas weren't just discovered, they were thriving. Empires larger than Europe's greatest kingdoms, roads stretching thousands of miles, cities teeming with millions until it all vanished. Why? And who wanted us to forget? Did the Vikings beat Columbus to America? Was there an empire in the Amazon erased from history? And what secret deals shaped the nations we live in today? Get ready, because we're peeling back the layers of time, exposing the truths they never wanted you to know. This is the hidden history of the Americas. And trust me, once you start watching, you won't be able to stop. Subscribe and uncover the truth history of the Americas. The human history of the Americas is thought to begin with people migrating to these areas from Asia during the height of an ice age. These groups are generally believed to have been isolated from the people of the Old World until the coming of Europeans in 1492 with the voyages of Christopher Columbus. The ancestors of today's American indigenous peoples were the Paleo-Indians. They were hunter-gatherers who migrated into North America. The most popular theory asserts that migrants came to the Americas via Beringia, the landmass now covered by the ocean waters of the Bering Strait. Small lithic stage peoples followed megafauna like bison, mammoth, now extinct, and caribou, thus gaining the modern nickname big game hunters. Groups of people may also have traveled into North America on shelf or sheet ice along the northern Pacific coast. Sedentary societies developed primarily in two regions, Mesoamerica and the Andean civilizations. Mesoamerican cultures include Zapotec, Toltec, Olmec, Maya, Aztec, Mixtec, Totonac, Teotihuacan, Huastec people, Purepecha, Izapa, and Mazatec. Andean cultures include Inca, Caral Soup, Wari, Tiwanaku, Chimor, Moche, Muisca, Chavin, Paracas, and Nazca. After the voyages of Christopher Columbus in 1492, Spanish and later Portuguese, English, French, and Dutch colonial expeditions arrived in the New World, conquering and settling the discovered lands, which led to a transformation of the cultural and physical landscape in the Americas. Spain colonized most of the Americas from present-day southwestern United States, Florida, and the Caribbean to the southern tip of South America. Portugal settled in what is mostly present-day Brazil, while England established colonies on the eastern coast of the United States, as well as the North Pacific coast and in most of Canada. France settled in Quebec and other parts of eastern Canada, and claimed an area in what is today the central United States. The Netherlands settled New Netherland, administrative center New Amsterdam, now New York, some Caribbean islands, and parts of northern South America. Pre-colonization. The peopling of the Americas began when Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, Paleo-Indians, entered North America from the North Asian Mammoth Steppe via the Bering Land Bridge, rapidly southward, occupying both North and South America by 12,000 to 14,000 years ago. The earliest populations in the Americas, before roughly 10,000 years ago, are known as Paleo-Indians. Indigenous peoples of the Americas have been linked to Siberian populations by proposed linguistic factors, the distribution of blood types, and in genetic composition as reflected by molecular data, such as DNA. While there is general agreement that the Americas were first settled from Asia, the pattern of migration, the precise date for the peoples of the Americas is a long-standing open question. While advances in archaeology, Pleistocene geology, physical anthropology, and DNA analysis have progressively shed more light on the subject, significant questions remain unresolved. The Clovis first theory refers to the hypothesis that the Clovis culture represents the earliest human presence in the Americas about 13,000 years ago. Evidence of pre-Clovis cultures has accumulated and pushed back the possible date of the first people of the Americas. Academics generally believe that humans reached North America south of the Laurentide ice sheet at some point between 15,000 and 20,000 years ago. Some new controversial archaeological evidence suggests the possibility that human arrival in the Americas may have occurred prior to the last glacial maximum more than 20,000 years ago. Lithic stage, before 8000 BCE, the Lithic stage, or Paleo-Indian period, is the earliest classification term referring to the first stage of human habitation in the Americas, covering the late Pleistocene epoch. The time period derives its name from the appearance of lithic flaked stone tools. Stone tools, particularly projectile points and scrapers, are the primary evidence of the earliest well-known human activity in the Americas. Lithic reduction stone tools are used by archaeologists and anthropologists to classify cultural periods. Archaic stage, 8000–1000 BCE, several thousand years after the first migrations. The first complex civilizations arose as hunter-gatherers settled into semi-agricultural communities. Identifiable sedentary settlements began to emerge in the so-called Middle Archaic period, around 6000 BCE. Particular archaeological cultures can be identified and easily classified throughout the Archaic period. In the late Archaic, on the north-central coastal region of Peru, a complex civilization arose which has been termed the Norte Chico civilization, also known as Caral Supe. It is the oldest known civilization in the Americas and one of the 6 sites where civilization originated independently and indigenously in the ancient world, flourishing between the 30th and 18th centuries BC. It predated the Mesoamerican Olmec civilization by nearly 2 millennia. It was contemporaneous with Egypt following the unification of its kingdom under Narmer and the emergence of the first Egyptian hieroglyphics. Monumental architecture, including earthwork platform mounds and sunken plazas, have been identified as part of the civilization. Archaeological evidence points to the use of textile technology and the worship of common god symbols. Government, possibly in the form of theocracy, is assumed to have been required to manage the region. However, numerous questions remain about its organization. In archaeological nomenclature, the culture was pre-ceramic culture of the pre-Columbian late Archaic period. It appears to have lacked ceramics and art. Ongoing scholarly debate persists over the extent to which the flourishing of Norte Chico resulted from its abundant maritime food resources and the relationship that these resources would suggest between coastal and inland sites. The role of seafood in the Norte Chico diet has been a subject of scholarly debate. In 1973, examining the Aspero region of Norte Chico, Michael E. Mosley contended that a maritime subsistence, seafood economy, had been the basis of society and its early flourishing. This theory, later termed Maritime Foundation of Andean Civilization, was at odds with the general scholarly consensus that civilization arose as a result of intensive grain-based agriculture, as had been the case in the emergence of civilizations in Northeast Africa, Egypt, and Southwest Asia, Mesopotamia. While earlier research pointed to edible domestic plants such as squash beans, Lucuma guava pacai, and camote et corral, publications by Haas and colleagues have added avocado, achira, and maize, zea maize, to the list of foods consumed in the region. In 2013, Haas and colleagues reported that maize was a primary component of the diet throughout the period of 3000 to 1800 BC. Cotton was another widespread crop in Norte Chico, essential to the production of fishing nets and textiles. Jonathan Haas noted a mutual dependency, whereby the prehistoric residents of the Norte Chico needed the fish resources for their protein, and the fishermen needed the cotton to make the nets to catch the fish. In the 2005 book, 1491, New Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus, journalist Charles C. Mann surveyed the literature at the time, reporting a date sometime before 3200 BC and possibly before 3500 BC as the beginning date for the formation of Norte Chico. He notes that the earliest date securely associated with a city is 3500 BC at Huaricanga in the inland Fortaleza area. The Norte Chico civilization began to decline around 1800 BC as more powerful centers appeared to the south and north along its coast and to the east within the Andes Mountains. Mesoamerica, the woodland period, and Mississippian culture, 2000 BCE, 500 CE. After the decline of the Norte Chico civilization, numerous complex civilizations and centralized policies developed in the Western Hemisphere. The Chavin, Nazca, Moche, Huari, Quitus, Cañares, Chimu, Pachacamac, Tiahuanaco, Aymara, and Inca in the Andes. The Muisca, Tairona, Miskito, Huetar, and Talamanca in the intermediate area. The Taínos in the Caribbean, and the Olmecs, Maya, Toltecs, Mixtecs, Zapotecs, Aztecs, Purepecha, and Nicoya in Mesoamerica. The Olmec civilization was the first Mesoamerican civilization, beginning around 1600–1400 BC and ending around 400 BC. Mesoamerica is considered one of the 6 sites around the globe in which civilization developed independently and indigenously. This civilization is considered the mother culture of the Mesoamerican civilizations. The Mesoamerican calendar, numeral system, writing, and much of the Mesoamerican pantheon seem to have begun with the Olmec. Some elements of agriculture seem to have been practiced in Mesoamerica quite early. The domestication of maize is thought to have begun around 7,500 to 12,000 years ago. The earliest record of lowland maize cultivation dates to around 5100 BC. Agriculture continued to be mixed with a hunting-gathering-fishing lifestyle until quite late compared to other regions. But by 2700 BC, Mesoamericans were relying on maize and living mostly in villages. Temple mounds and classes started to appear. By 1300 to 1200 BC, small centers coalesced into the Olmec civilization, which seems to have been a set of city-states, united in religious and commercial concerns. The Olmec cities had ceremonial complexes with earth-clay pyramids, palaces, stone monuments, aqueducts, and walled plazas. The first of these centers was at San Lorenzo, until 900 BC. La Venta was the last great Olmec center. Olmec artisans sculpted jade and clay figurines of jaguars and humans. Their iconic giant heads, believed to be of Olmec rulers, stood in every major city. The Olmec civilization ended in 400 BC with the defacing and destruction of San Lorenzo and La Venta, 2 of the major cities. It nevertheless spawned many other states, most notably the Mayan civilization, whose first cities began appearing around 700–600 BC. Olmec influences continued to appear in many later Mesoamerican civilizations. Cities of the Aztecs, Mayas, and Incas were as large and organized as the largest in the Old World, with an estimated population of 200,000 to 350,000 in Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. The market established in the city was said to have been the largest ever seen by the conquistadors when they arrived. The capital of the Cahokians, Cahokia, located near modern East St. Louis, Illinois. These civilizations developed agriculture as well, breeding maize, corn, from having ears 2 to 5 centimeters in length to perhaps 10 to 15 centimeters in length. Potatoes, tomatoes, beans, greens, pumpkins, avocados, and chocolate are now the most popular of the pre-Columbian agricultural products. The civilizations did not develop extensive livestock, as there were few suitable species, although alpacas and llamas were domesticated for use as beasts of burden and sources of wool and meat in the Andes. By the 15th century, maize was being farmed in the Mississippi River Valley after introduction from Mexico. The course of further agricultural development was greatly altered by the arrival of Europeans. Classic stage, 800 BCE, 1533 CE, Cahokia was a major regional chiefdom, with trade and tributary chiefdoms located in a range of areas from bordering the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Haudenosaunee Iroquois, also known as the Five Nations. They were known by the French during the colonial years as the Iroquois League, and later as the Iroquois Confederacy, while the English simply called them the Five Nations. Their country has been called Iroquois and Haudenosaunee in English and Iroquois in French. The peoples of the Iroquois included, from east to west, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. After 1722, the Iroquoian-speaking Tuscarora people from the southeast were accepted into the Confederacy, from which point it was known as the Six Nations. The Confederacy was likely formed between 1142 and 1660, but there is little widespread consensus on the exact date. The Confederacy emerged from the Great Law of Peace, said to have been composed by Deganawida, the Great Peacemaker, Hiawatha, and Jigon-Sase, the Mother of Nations. For nearly 200 years, the Six Nations Haudenosaunee Confederacy were a powerful factor in North American colonial policy, with some scholars arguing for the concept of the middle ground, in that European powers were used by the Iroquois just as much as Europeans used them. At its peak, around 1700, Iroquois power extended from what is today New York State north into present-day Ontario and Quebec, along the lower Great Lakes, upper St. Lawrence, and south on both sides of the Allegheny Mountains into present-day Virginia and Kentucky, and into the Ohio Valley. The St. Lawrence Iroquoians, Wendat, Huron, Erie, and Susquehannock, all independent peoples known to the European colonists, also spoke Iroquoian languages. They are considered Iroquoian in a larger cultural sense, all being descended from the Proto-Iroquoian people and language. Historically, however, they were competitors and enemies of the Iroquois Confederacy nations. In 2010, more than 45,000 enrolled Six Nations people lived in Canada and over 81,000 in the United States. The Iroquois League of Nations, or People of the Longhouse, based in present-day upstate and western New York, had a confederacy model from the mid-15th century. It has been suggested that their culture contributed to political thinking during the development of the later United States government. Their system of affiliation was a kind of federation, different from the strong, centralized European monarchies. Leadership was restricted to a group of 50 sachem chiefs, each representing one clan within a tribe. The Oneida and Mohawk people had 9 seats each. The Onondagas held 14, the Cayuga had 10 seats, and the Seneca had 8. Representation was not based on population numbers, as the Seneca tribe greatly outnumbered the others. When a sachem chief died, his successor was chosen by the senior woman of his tribe in consultation with other female members of the clan. Property and hereditary leadership were passed matrilineally. Decisions were not made through voting, but through consensus decision-making, with each sachem chief holding theoretical veto power. The Onondaga were the firekeepers, responsible for raising topics to be discussed. They occupied one side of a 3-sided fire. The Mohawk and Seneca sat on one side of the fire. The Oneida and Cayuga sat on the third side. Long-distance trading did not prevent warfare and displacement among the indigenous peoples, and their oral histories tell of numerous migrations to the historic territories where Europeans encountered them. The Iroquois invaded and attacked tribes in the Ohio River area of present-day Kentucky and claimed the hunting grounds. Historians have placed these events as occurring as early as the 13th century, or in the 17th century Beaver Wars. Through warfare, the Iroquois drove several tribes to migrate west to what became known as their historically traditional lands west of the Mississippi River. Tribes originating in the Ohio Valley who moved west included the Osage, Kaw, Ponca, and Omaha people. By the mid-17th century, they had resettled in their historical lands in present-day Kansas, Nebraska, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. The Osage warred with Caddo-speaking Native Americans, displacing them in turn by the mid-18th century and dominating their new historical territories. Oasis America is a cultural region of indigenous peoples in North America. Their pre-contact cultures were predominantly agrarian, in contrast with neighboring tribes to the south in Aridoamerica. The region spans parts of northwestern Mexico and southwestern United States, and can include most of Arizona and New Mexico, southern parts of Utah and Colorado, and northern parts of Sonora and Chihuahua. During some historical periods, It might have included parts of California and Texas as well. The term was first proposed by German-Mexican anthropologist Paul Kirchhoff, who also coined Mesoamerica and Aridoamerica, and is used by some scholars, primarily Mexican anthropologists, for the broad cultural area defining pre-Columbian southwestern North America. It extends from modern-day Utah down to southern Chihuahua, and from the coast on the Gulf of California eastward to the Rio Bravo River Valley. Its name comes from its position in relationship with the similar regions of Mesoamerica and mostly nomadic Aridoamerica. The term Greater Southwest is often used to describe this region by American anthropologists, while Oasis, America, is more used by Mexican scholars. Pueblo people. The Pueblo peoples, or Puebloans, are Native Americans in the southwestern United States who share common agricultural, material, and religious practices. Among the currently inhabited pueblos, Taos, San Ildefonso, Acoma, Zuni, and Hopi are some of the most commonly known. Pueblo people speak languages from 4 different language families, and each pueblo is further divided culturally by kinship systems and agricultural practices, although all cultivate varieties of corn, maize. Pueblo peoples have lived in the American Southwest for millennia and descend from the ancestral Puebloans. The term Anasazi is sometimes used to refer to ancestral Puebloan peoples, but it is considered derogatory and offensive. Anasazi is a Navajo adoption of a Ute term that translates to ancient enemy or primitive enemy, but was used by them to mean something like barbarian or savage, hence the modern Pueblo people's rejection of it. Pueblo is a Spanish term for village. When Spanish conquest of the Americas began in the 16th century with the founding of Nuevo Mexico, they came across complex, multi-story villages built of adobe, stone, and other local materials. New Mexico contains the largest number of federally recognized Pueblo communities, though some Pueblo communities also live in Arizona and Texas and along the Rio Grande and Colorado rivers and their tributaries. Pueblo nations have maintained much of their traditional cultures, which center around agricultural practices. A tight-knit community revolving around family clans and respect for tradition. Pueblo people have been remarkably adept at preserving their culture and core religious beliefs, including developing syncretic Pueblo Christianity. Exact numbers of Pueblo peoples are unknown, but, in the 21st century, some 75,000 Pueblo people live predominantly in New Mexico and Arizona, but also in Texas and elsewhere. The Pueblo people of what is now occupied by the southwestern United States and northern Mexico, living conditions were that of large stone apartment-like adobe structures. They live in Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and possibly surrounding areas. Aridoamerica. Aridoamerica is a cultural and ecological region spanning northern Mexico and the southwestern United States, defined by the presence of the drought-resistant, culturally significant staple food, the tepary bean, Phaseolus acutifolius. Its dry, arid climate and geography stand in contrast to the verdant Mesoamerica of present-day central Mexico into Central America to the south and east, and the higher, milder island of Oasis America to the north. Aridoamerica overlaps with both. Because of the relatively hard conditions, the pre-Columbian people in this region developed distinct cultures and subsistence farming patterns. The term was introduced by American anthropologist Gary Paul Nabhan in 1985, building on prior work by anthropologists A. L. Kroeber and Paul Kirchhoff to identify a true cultural entity for the desert region. Kirchhoff first introduced the term Aridoamerica in 1954 and wrote, "I propose for that of the gatherers the name Aridoamerica and Arid American culture, and for that of the farmers Oasis America and American Oasis culture." Mexican anthropologist Guillermo Bonfil Batalla notes that although the distinction between Aridoamerica and Mesoamerica is useful for understanding the general history of pre-colonial Mexico, that the boundary between the two should not be conceptualized as a barrier that separated two radically different worlds, but rather as a variable limit between climatic regions. The inhabitants of Aridoamerica lived on an unstable and fluctuating frontier, and were in constant relations with the civilizations to the south. Chichimeca, is the name that the Nahua peoples of Mexico generically applied to nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples who were established in present-day Bajío region of Mexico. Chichimeca carried the same meaning as the Roman term barbarian that described Germanic tribes. The name, with its pejorative sense, was adopted by the Spanish Empire. In the words of scholar Charlotte M. Grady, for the Spanish, the Chichimecas were a wild, nomadic people who lived north of the Valley of Mexico. They had no fixed dwelling places, lived by hunting, wore little clothes, and fiercely resisted foreign intrusion into their territory, which happened to contain silver mines the Spanish wished to exploit. Grady noted that Chichimeca was used as a broad and generalizing term by outsiders writing it, was used by both Spanish and Nahuatl speakers to refer collectively to many different people who exhibited a wide range of cultural development from hunter-gatherers to sedentary agriculturalists with sophisticated political organizations. They practiced animal sacrifice, and they were feared for their expertise and brutality in war. The Chichimeca War, 1550-1590, ended with the Spanish making favorable peace terms with the Chichimeca. Spanish-Chichimeca interaction resulted in a drastic population decline in population of all the peoples known collectively as Chichimecas, and to their eventual disappearance as peoples of all save the Pames of San Luis Potosí and the related Chichimeca Jonas of the Sierra Gorda in eastern Guanajuato. In modern times, only one ethnic group is customarily referred to as Chichimecs, namely the Chichimeca Jonas, a few thousand of whom live in the state of Guanajuato. In Chichimeca was the name that the Mexica, Aztecs, generically applied to a wide range of semi-nomadic peoples who inhabited the north of modern-day Mexico and carried the same sense as the European term barbarian. The name was adopted with a pejorative tone by the Spaniards when referring especially to the semi-nomadic hunter-gatherer peoples of northern Mexico. Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica is a historical region and cultural area that begins in the southern part of North America and extends to the Pacific coast of Central America, thus comprising the lands of central and southern Mexico, all of Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, and parts of Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. As a cultural area, Mesoamerica is defined by a mosaic of cultural traits developed and shared by its indigenous cultures. In the pre-Columbian era, many indigenous societies flourished in Mesoamerica for more than 3,000 years before the Spanish colonization of the Americas began on Hispaniola in 1493. In world history, Mesoamerica was the site of two historical transformations. I. Primary urban generation, and I. The formation of New World cultures from the mixtures of the indigenous Mesoamerican peoples with the European, African, and Asian peoples who were introduced by the Spanish colonization of the Americas. Mesoamerica is one of the 6 areas in the world where ancient civilization arose independently, and the second in the Americas, alongside the Caral Supe in present-day Peru. Mesoamerica is also one of only 5 regions of the world where writing is known to have independently developed, the others being ancient Egypt, India, Sumer, and China. Beginning as early as 7000 BCE, the domestication of cacao, maize, beans, tomato, avocado, vanilla, squash, and chili, as well as the turkey and dog, resulted in a transition from Paleo-Indian hunter-gatherer tribal groupings to the organization of sedentary agricultural villages. In the subsequent formative period, agriculture and cultural traits, such as a complex mythological and religious tradition, a vigesimal numeral system, a complex calendric system, a tradition of ball playing, and a distinct architectural style, were diffused through the area. Villages began to become socially stratified and develop into chiefdoms, and large ceremonial centers were built interconnected by a network of trade routes for the exchange of luxury goods, such as obsidian jade cacao cinnabar, spondylus shells hematite, and ceramics. While Mesoamerican civilization knew of the wheel and basic metallurgy, neither of these became technologically relevant. Among the earliest complex civilizations was the Olmec culture, which inhabited the Gulf Coast of Mexico and extended inland and southwards across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Frequent contact and cultural interchange between the early Olmec and other cultures in Chiapas, Oaxaca, and Guatemala laid the basis for the Mesoamerican cultural area. All this was facilitated by considerable regional communications in ancient Mesoamerica, especially along the Pacific coast. In the subsequent pre-classic period, complex urban politics began to develop among the Maya. With the rise of centers such as Aguada Fenix and Calakmul in Mexico, El Mirador and Tikal in Guatemala, and the Zapotec at Monte Alban. During this period, the first true Mesoamerican writing systems were developed in the Olmec and the Zapotec cultures. The Mesoamerican writing tradition reached its height in the classic Maya logosyllabic script. In central Mexico, the city of Teotihuacan ascended at the height of the classic period. It formed a military and commercial empire whose political influence stretched south into the Maya area and northward. Upon the collapse of Teotihuacan around 600 CE, competition between several important political centers in central Mexico, such as Xochicalco and Cholula, ensued. At this time during the Epiclassic period, the Nahua peoples began moving south into Mesoamerica from the north and became politically and culturally dominant in central Mexico, as they displaced speakers of Oto-Manguean languages. During the early post-classic period, central Mexico was dominated by the Toltec culture and Oaxaca by the Mixtec. The lowland Maya area had important centers at Chichen Itza and Mayapan. Towards the end of the post-classic period, the Aztecs of central Mexico built a tributary empire covering most of central Mesoamerica. The distinct Mesoamerican cultural tradition ended with the Spanish conquest in the 16th century. Eurasian diseases, such as smallpox and measles, which were endemic among the colonists but new to North America, caused the deaths of upwards of 90% of the indigenous people, resulting in great losses to their societies and cultures. Over the next centuries, Mesoamerican indigenous cultures were gradually subjected to Spanish colonial rule. Aspects of the Mesoamerican cultural heritage still survive among the indigenous peoples who inhabit Mesoamerica. Many continue to speak their ancestral languages and maintain many practices harkening back to their Mesoamerican roots. Olmec, the Olmecs or Olmec, were an early known major Mesoamerican civilization, flourishing in the modern-day Mexican states of Veracruz and Tabasco from roughly 1200 to 400 BCE during Mesoamerica's formative period. They were initially centered at the site of their development in San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan, but moved to La Venta in the 10th century BCE following the decline of San Lorenzo. The Olmecs disappeared mysteriously in the 4th century BCE, leaving the region sparsely populated until the 19th century. Among other firsts, the Olmec appeared to practice ritual bloodletting and played the Mesoamerican ball game, hallmarks of nearly all subsequent Mesoamerican societies. The aspect of the Olmecs most familiar now is their artwork, particularly the colossal heads. The Olmec civilization was first defined through artifacts which collectors purchased on the pre-Columbian art market in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Olmec artworks are considered among ancient America's most striking. The Olmec civilization emerged around 1200 BCE in Mesoamerica and ended around 400 BCE. Olmec art and concepts influenced surrounding cultures after their downfall. This civilization was thought to be the first in America to develop a writing system. After the Olmecs abandoned their cities for unknown reasons, the Maya, Zapotec, and Teotihuacan arose.